Welcome to the Hoff Time Report. And by the way, I'm sorry we're running just a few minutes late here. What's interesting is I've been in the broadcast world for since the late '80s, and I've never been late to a show before until my own. So it's good to be here. I'm actually in Idaho Falls today. I was just having dinner with some friends and just got tied up a little bit in traffic. So apologize for the delay in getting started. But I want to welcome to the program Representative Jim Addis from Coeur d'Alene. I've known Jim for a number of years now. In fact, I met Jim for the first time at a friend of mine's house and got to know Jim and learn more about his campaign. How you doing?
I'm doing
How you
great,
doing,
Wayne. I
Jim?
I remember that. That was seems like
Do you remember
yesterday.
that?
Yeah.
It's interesting because when we were at that meeting and we were just kind of getting to know each other, I was kind of feeling you out and trying to figure out, okay, just, he says he's on our side. How conservative is he? How conservative will he turn out to be if he's elected into office? And you were. Um, where do you think what has changed in your mind since that encounter? Do you find that you are as conservative as you thought you would be, or less conservative than you thought you would be?
I don't think I've been less conservative. I just look at things through a different lens, as far as I try to focus on spending and tax and policy and things like that. I've always been, I think, conservative in that regard. Um, I don't think I've come to Boise and said, "Boy, I'm going to abandon what I think," and I've made a wholesale change. So I
So you landed pretty much where you thought you were going to be when we met the first time. So no surprises to you, or you're maybe in the subject matter that you're just like, well, I'm a conservative, but I didn't think I'd be having to deal with snowmobile fees this year or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I knew that my passion was not in the health and welfare committees. Not to say there is anything wrong with them, or in, say, for example, the education committees. Um, I, I I I wanted to be involved in transportation and in revenue and taxation, because I think those places are so important for keeping Idaho. And of course, I landed in the Natural Resources Committee, which I think is so vitally important, because um, we can make strides in our natural resources and in our mining and our timber that can really set Idaho free as far as economically um, for now and our future. But I think um, we have tapped up potential in our natural resources to allow Idaho to be independent, and Idaho to be um, as self-sufficient as we can make Idaho, if that makes sense to you.
That's an issue you were anticipating you were going to be working on at the legislature?
Yeah, I anticipated land use and economic issues. Um, our lands and the use of our lands, and hopefully maximizing the use of our federal lands, I thought was imperative into keeping us economically strong and economically independent. And that, as well as I think a tax policy is very important. Um, I think, regardless of what you think on some of these other policies, and people have varied opinions, if you don't have a strong economy and a strong state, an independent state, it really doesn't matter what those policies are, because you can't afford it. So I think it's so vitally important to have a strong economic base. I think it's so important to have a good tax policy, and I think it's important to leave as much money in our citizens' pockets as possible, because I trust them to make the decisions more so than anyone else. So
I,
I
I
kind
guess
of
we
figured
could.
I'd be involved in items like that.
Yeah, I guess we can start with that because that's the biggest issue that you've encountered so far this legislative session, and it came pretty quickly. And of course, you're on the Revenue and Taxation Committee, and so the
Yep.
discussion starts with you. So, how did you think that whole thing went with the governor gave a state of the state. I've never seen it happen this rapidly, quite frankly. And this is my 28th legislative session. The governor made his speech. The bill was printed, I think, a few days later, and a few days after that, it was in committee. Less than I think, start to finish in the House, it was gone in a week and a half or something. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it's
You know,
pretty
well,
quick.
I guess if you just go from the point when the bill was introduced to when it was dispatched through the House, that was a week, right?
Yeah,
Or
I think you're probably right. I don't know exactly, but if you're not right, you're pretty close.
so but the point is, it was expeditious. So what did you think of that? I mean, was it the bill that you wanted? Was it the bill that you would have hoped to have seen if of all the different kinds of tax policy that was floating around?
I don't. Yeah, I like the bill because it gets money back into Idahoans' hands. I think there's much more we can do, and I think you're going to see it. And I was just talking to Dustin earlier. I am aware of certain RSs that are coming that I think will address property tax. I think properly, and I think they can be very, very impactful. I didn't work on the tax bill that has passed through the House, and I believe it passed through Senate committee today, is my understanding,
It did,
and
yes.
it will come to the Senate floor. But I do know that Chairman Harris has been working on that, and as you know, that's his hot button, and that's what he worked on last year, also the income tax bill. So, um, not being involved on the inside of how the bill went, it doesn't surprise me because Chairman Harris is pretty thorough, and Chairman Harris is very focused. And I think he had this something like this ready over the summer, quite frankly, and it was ready to go. It would be my guess.
Well, he's a numbers guy. I mean, he loves
Yes,
numbers,
he
and
is.
that doesn't
He's an
it
engineer.
doesn't surprise me at all. I was just kind of wondering, for example, and I've said this before to folks that I have a lot of years experience working with the Revenue Tax Committee going back to 1995.
Uh-huh.
Most of my formative quotation marks years was watching Dolores Crow run that committee,
Okay.
and in 2000, 2001, the state had a really big surplus. And there were many bills considered at that time to reduce taxes. And it took a while. It was, I don't remember exactly how long it took both those years. There was a surplus in 2000, another surplus in 2001. So the legislature had 2 years to deal with it. But in those 2 years, it seemed that there were many, 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 many more options on the table. And of course, if you had two options on the table this time, you would have multiplied the number that we actually had by a factor of two. So 100% increase in the number of bills. I just don't. Did you? I mean, would you have preferred Did you like that process? Would you have preferred to have a larger discussion about other possible changes, or were you, I mean, what was your preference? Did you think that that was the right way, or would you rather have seen, 10 bills with different kinds of approaches?
Well, Wayne, I think you're going to see a lot of bills. I think one's going to come first, and I don't think you're going to have a situation where you're going to put them all out there. And which one do you want? I don't think I haven't seen it work that way. I think I think what you will see is you will see some property tax bills come out. I think um, you're going to see some more transparency efforts to try to shine the light on local property taxes. I don't know of the some other bills coming out, but I think you're going to see those. I think this was ready first. And again, I don't mind getting money back into the citizens' pockets. I would agree with the thought that we do need to do more, and I think we are going to do more. So this one happened first, and it was ready to go. Again, not being inside that process, I saw some of it that you did, the same thing that you did. But also being inside that committee, I know what some of the other folks are working on. And so this isn't a trust me moment, but I think you're going to see some other tax bills that can work with this bill also.
Oh
And,
yeah,
and, and so the order it came in, I don't have the experience that you have in all these years of doing it. So I don't have that frame of reference. To me, it was, the chairman was ready with his bill. He was ready to go. He knew what he wanted. I think it was, and I think it was ready to go when it went.
I mean,
If that was the only bill we were going to do, I would be a little more concerned, but I think we're going to do more bills.
I mean, I certainly understand that, and I've been assured by other legislators too that that's the case. I totally get that, and you're right that uh, getting money back in people's pockets is very, very appropriate, and not just for economic development purposes, but because that's money that I earned, and returning that
Absolutely.
money to
That's
me.
your
And
money.
when I read, yeah, when I read these liberals, and today I guess the Democrats had a press conference. Did you hear about that? And they said
I
that
heard about it, but I'm not aware of what was in it.
yeah, I mean, I of course I have to go based on what I read in the paper, so I trust but
I've
verify.
seen the
So
arguments. Yeah, I've seen the
yeah,
arguments.
but they're looking for like refundable tax credits, and my feeling, and they're angry that the people who earn the money are the folks who are getting back the money. They want wealth redistribution, and that's outrageous.
Well, and I would agree with you, Wayne. I think that's spot on. Um, One of my niches and what I'm trying to fight for is property tax relief, and we've done some work on it, and it's a start, and we've got to do more. Obviously, those are local decisions. And while I want property tax relief, you've got a guy that might have paid $6,000 or $7,000 into income tax, and maybe his tax bill was $4,000. You're going to redistribute that wealth, $3,000 to someone else. So I just didn't see the nexus between, hey, if we do this, we can't do, we should use this money for
No,
property tax relief. There's certain things that I want to get accomplished, but I think we need to accomplish it in the proper way.
yeah, no, I mean, I'm grateful for the really. Here's where I'm having a trouble
Okay.
is, you know, the rate is too high. It's high. It's been too high, and there's been an effort over the last 20 years to lower the rate, and that's been great, but still higher than other states. Some states don't have an income tax, and when you put
I
the
like that.
yeah, and when you put the this bill first, you're not going to pass a bill to lower the income tax from 6.5 to 6, and then come with another bill that completely eliminates the income tax.
Oh,
So
I would completely agree with you. I completely agree with you.
we've foreclosed the possibility of even having a discussion about whether we could do it and how we get there. That bothers me. And I'll tell you something else,
I
Jim.
understand that. I understand that.
Here's the thing that really gets me. And I'm not putting this on your shoulders, by the way. Don't think that I am, because that's unfair. But when the liberal Democrats in Idaho had control over the Capitol in the 1930s, and they first put in the income tax, do you know what the rate was?
I do not.
Check my facts on this. I think it was 1%.
I heard it was very low. I thought it was around 2, but it was
So
very
so
low. I agree.
just how excited should we be that the income tax is still, by a significant margin, higher than it was when the liberal Democrats first put it in place. Now, by the way, I understand that at that point in time we had a statewide property tax as well, so it may not be a fair apples to apples comparison. But at the same time, we didn't have a state sales tax back then either. So now we
Well,
have.
Wayne, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll completely agree with you in the fact. I mean, if I could wave a magic wand, I would not have an income tax. I don't have a problem with looking at sales tax in covering some of our income tax. I'm with you. I mean, we've had those discussions over the years. Representative Assistant Majority Leader Monks had a plan to try to use sales tax to offset property tax, and there were some complications with that. We had a pretty robust discussion on that. And I think there are some folks more and more talking about, well, if we're going to do something, maybe it's I'm not going to say easier, because we're not supposed to be doing something easy. We're supposed to do it the right way. But, I don't have a problem with the discussion on, well, let's look at our exchanging sales tax for income tax. And that's a lot more effective way, uh, distribution of those funds. So yeah, I would agree with you on that.
But do you think we'll ever have that conversation? I mean, like legit have that conversation?
I think we will. I mean, the question is, are you going to get enough people to be able to get some critical mass to get it done? But I've had the discussion with various people, and it hasn't been in committee. But yeah, I would have no problem with that conversation. I mean, I like that idea, quite frankly.
Um, do you think that, I mean, so you're vice chairman of the committee,
Yes, sir.
and of course, no one knows what the future holds, but there's some possibility that one day you could be chairman of the committee.
I would like to think
Were,
so.
were you in that position and you could wave a magic wand and you could have your wish of any tax policy passed, what would you like to see it look like?
Well, if the numbers worked out, Wayne, again, we have to do some serious number crunching, but
Let's
I
ignore
would,
the numbers. Yeah.
I would trade income tax for sales tax, personally. I like that idea. It works.
Does that mean, would you, in order to get there, and I know I promised you we wouldn't talk about numbers, and I'm not trying to take back my
There
promise,
you go again.
but the thought just crossed my mind because
Yeah.
one of the things that have been vexing legislators for many years is the constitution of the sales tax. So obviously the sales tax on groceries we talk about, and we
Yep.
say, wouldn't it be cool if we got rid of the sales tax on groceries? But then there are other folks who want to go farther, and they want to remove the various exemptions. They don't want to exempt sales groceries, and some, I think, would argue you ought to throw some services back into the mix. At least maybe then you would lower the. What do you think about that?
I know some states have done a real good job of that. I've gone to a couple legislative tax forums, and there's a gentleman in North Carolina, and what North Carolina did, and it's working well for them. And I haven't made an analysis of what to do here. And they ended up reducing income tax rates, increasing sales tax. They did almost an omnibus bill, which has never been done in Idaho as far as that's concerned, and it worked real well. If the sales tax was reasonable, we'll have to have a discussion on what's reasonable.
What is reasonable?
I don't know. That's a discussion we have to have. You said regardless of numbers. I gave you regardless of numbers. I would
Yeah,
trade
no, I didn't.
sales
Yeah,
tax
it was just.
for income tax.
Yeah,
So
it's not really. It's more of a question, not so much of the numbers, but as a function of the policy. There are some folks who think that, put the numbers aside, but you do know that if you got rid of the sales tax exemptions, that potentially would produce a possibility of lowering the overall rate. However, you'd
absolutely,
probably
absolutely.
But you'd probably increase the number of bureaucrats at the tax commission, and certainly the number of folks who would have to have a sales tax permit, and who would have to remit sales tax to the government, and would likely be audited to make sure they remitted the right amounts and that they were taxing the right things, and so on and so forth. So it is a trade-off.
Yeah.
I just wanted to. There are people who over the years have been adamant about not taxing services. Are you one of those people?
I have been that way in the past. The gentleman from North Carolina, and I know there's a very big lobby here in Idaho that feels that way too, and I understand that. What they did in North Carolina was they taxed certain services, not all of the services, but certain services that were easy, low-hanging fruit to do, and increased the tax base, flatter, lower rate, but then they could trade that off for income tax down the road. So I think it's worth talking about.
It,
But I think,
that's
I can say anything on the show to you, and And I think it's worth talking about that and looking at that and seeing how feasible that is. And I really don't have a problem talking about that stuff. I really don't. I don't know where it goes, but I think it's worth discussing.
What are your thoughts on the sales tax on groceries? I can't remember if you ever voted on that before.
I've never had a bill to vote on. I don't
Okay.
believe.
What's your position on it?
I don't like taxes on anything to be overarching, but there are two ways to get around. Again, it's taxes on food because Tide and paper plates are still going to probably have property sales taxes on them. So there are two ways to do it. There is to get rid of sales tax on groceries. There is the credit. Some people like one, some people like another. I'm a little agnostic on it. I want to make sure that we get the Idaho taxpayer relief from paying taxes. So if we can find something that works that reduces that tax load, I would be in favor of it. So
Well, I mean,
again,
the premise behind the removing the sales tax on groceries is sort of a moral question. There are folks that feel that kind of the way it's immoral to tax people on their casket on their way out,
yeah,
or tax their prescription drugs. It's also immoral to tax. I know this may hit close to home, and I apologize. It seems to be okay to tax a vehicle, for example, but not
very
tax
true.
the food that you need to eat. Because I mean, you can always you might need the truck to get to work, but you don't have to have the truck to work. You may have to get a different job or something like that, for example, I guess. But you need food to live. So the moral question, actually, it's broken into two parts. It's one of it's immoral to tax people on the food they need to live, and then the other moral part is, in the case of the way Idaho's sales tax on food is constructed, none of that tax collection is used to fund any government. It just sits in a bank account over at the state tax commission, and then the tax commission remits that money to you via via the grocery tax
The credit.
credit.
Yeah. The
So,
tax.
and
Yes.
that's always been the way, and people have said over the years, okay, well, we'll increase the size of the credit, and then when the credit amounts to enough money that it's equivalent to how much money is being repatriated through the sales tax on groceries, we'll just go and send that money. We'll just cancel each other. We'll just cancel them out. We'll get rid of the grocery tax credit. We'll get rid of the grocery tax, and it'll be done. Now the new narrative is, oh, well, those pesky Californians are coming in here and they buy groceries, and we want to collect taxes from that, and this is how we do it. So, I mean, with that in mind, I mean, do you don't feel a particular calling to the argument that it's immoral or that it's wrong to hold money in the bank account, or even the idea that it's taxing Californians?
For me, it's not as much a moral issue as it's a financial issue for the people that are paying the tax, quite frankly. Um, I believe that whatever we do to attack this issue, if by removing, for example, a grocery tax credit and not taxing the food portion of it, if the tax burden for the individual goes up, I don't like that. If by increasing a credit, we more than offset what a person pays in taxes on food, and it puts more in their pocket, and it makes them, I mean, that I really like. I want them to have more disposable income. I don't want to do anything that is going to make them worse off than they are now. And so that's obviously a mathematical equation. I think people from either side are going to talk about the benefits of interstate traffic. They're going to talk about a stable source. So they're going to talk about a flat and low tax rate. So I think there's good points, Wayne, to be made on both sides. For me, I mean, I appreciate a person's moral view, and I certainly respect it, and I appreciate it. For me, it's doing the best thing that I can to make sure we keep money in folks' pockets and get them as much money while they purchase those things they need to survive. I agree with you. You need food to survive. So I'm trying to do the
Do,
best I can for that situation.
do you hope to hear a debate on that, or would you?
I'd
It
love
wouldn't
to.
matter to you one way or the other. What's that?
I'd love to hear a debate.
Okay.
I think that's what good government does.
And I guess, finally, uh, you mentioned that property tax was of a very big concern to him. And finally, on the
Yes,
tax
sir.
policy topic, there's plenty more to talk about. But on tax policy, what do you hope to see have happen with regard to property tax? Again, if you had your way, what would you like to see have happen? What do you hope that you'll be able to go home to your constituents in Coeur d'Alene and say, property taxes are no longer a problem because blank? I feel like that
Well,
TV
I had
show.
the
What was that
conversation.
TV show? The Blank Show or something? The Match Game.
So
The Match.
Dustin and I had a great conversation on this before I went on with you, and it was natural and it rolled, and I got it done in pretty quick, didn't I, Dustin? Um, so here's my hope. My hope would be that every local taxpayer would go to their budget meetings and have an impact on what their budgets were, because the only controllable portion of property taxes is the budget. You cannot control the market. The market is the market. I know that's not going to happen. You know that's not going to happen. The next best thing is I want to make sure that the state provides our local taxpayers black and white information on budgets, on what the state provides in distributions to help offset and reduce property taxes, so folks can ask the right questions at home. Again, all property tax is local. The state does not collect a penny in property tax. And I think it's so important for the local folks at home to be aware of this and ask those questions. I've got some things working with the controller that won't require a statute that are going to shine that light a little better. But the other thing I think, Wayne, is that I think we can both agree that well, I'm not a big fan of unfunded mandates, and I'm sure you're not a fan of unfunded mandates either. I know if Washington, D.C. were to tell us to do something in Idaho and they didn't want us to pay us to do it, I think that would be a real problem. And it is a real problem. I think that when transparency is complete and we know exactly what is being spent, perhaps on what some would consider unfunded mandates from the state, we would either make them not mandatory, or if they have to be done, there should be relief to the local property taxpayer. And I think that can lead to tremendous property tax relief, especially if it goes to true property tax relief, whether that's coming off a budget, whether that's coming off a levy. But I think we have to, I still think we have to look at the cost side of the equation. And like Representative Wisniewski mentioned at one of our town halls, the people have to be in a position to say, this is what we want to pay for, right? And they do that through their local elections. So I'm hoping that education's one. I want to then those items that require local folks to pay for things mandated upon them, if that can be taken care of, that is huge property tax relief. But
What things are you talking about, Jim? I mean, because you have things like public defense and county jails, and
there's a list that we're given that it can be up to 30. And I think we have discussions on which of those are mandates and what aren't. But there are certain things that are required to be spent that the state will pick up a certain amount of that cost, but there are other costs that have to be borne by the counties. And so I think if we look at that and if we see that's there.
But some of that belongs in the realm of the legislature. I mean, I hear that this seems to be the new talking point. And I'm not trying to accuse you of just spilling talking points, believe me, but I've heard it a lot lately where legislators will say, remember, this is your local officials who are responsible for what you're paying in property taxes. And that is true. But there's also a system that's been designed by the legislature that the legislature could change. You mentioned the local. Okay, the legislature's created a mechanism where you're very well knowledgeable about politics because you're in politics, and I am too. Um, but you probably have. I have 10 taxing districts on my that I live in that are on my property tax statement that I get every year. You probably have a similar number, and that's probably what, 50 or 60 elected officials. Do you know them all? Do you know them all their names? Do you
I
go
know
to
a
all?
good
Do you read all
majority.
their budgets? What that?
I know a good majority of the folks, and maybe not everybody on the board, but
You
I've
don't
lived
know
in my
all of
community
them,
for,
and you
I
can't
said, a
possibly.
majority of them.
You
I don't
okay,
know
fair
all
enough.
of them personally, no, but I know a majority of them. I know my
But
commissioners, I
you
know my city
you
council
you don't
people, I know my school board people, I know
but
my
you don't know
taxing
you
district
don't know
people.
you don't know all the, and most of your constituents don't have the luxury of knowing all those people, nor attending
True.
10 budget hearings, nor reading 10 budget documents. And
Absolutely.
that's a system that the state legislature created. Doesn't the legislature have some responsibility of demystifying this system where, I mean, in Canyon County, there's I think 5 highway districts, 5.
Right.
And 8 now just where we are, well, I'm in Idaho Falls right now, but you're in Boise. There's one highway district, but I bet you a lot of people think the county commissioners or the city of Boise are responsible for the roads. So there's
I
a
wouldn't doubt
diffusion
that at
of
all.
of,
Yeah.
of accountability and responsibility. Is there not a place for the legislature to do something about that? And I think, another question I would ask is the legislature's created a mechanism of passing property tax costs from one class of individual onto another. We have urban renewal, for
Yeah.
example, where you can lock the value of the property at a base amount, build a giant mall on top of farmland, and still regard that mall as farmland for tax purposes, which drives up the levy for everybody else. That's the legislature
Totally
did
agree.
that. My county commissioners didn't. The city council didn't do that. They're taking advantage of it, of course, but the legislature said, is there not a place for a discussion amongst the legislature about that impact, or a law that says um, the county can tell a business of a certain size, you don't need to pay property taxes for 5 years? Is there a place to discuss any of that?
Oh, absolutely. I have had those discussions last session, and I'm having those discussions this session. I agree with you. I think there's certain things we can look at with urban renewal that that could be helpful. And I know
Why, and you know that, and I know that, but this is why is no one having, why are we not hearing anything about it?
I don't know why you're not hearing anything about it right now, Wayne. You would know as well as I do. Um, it takes somebody discussing it. I discussed it last session, and I couldn't get the bill to go anywhere. And
Well,
so
what is your
I
bill? What, what,
understand all
what
that.
was your idea? What was your idea? What did you want to do?
It was a bill that would allow the local taxing districts the ability to opt out of an urban renewal district at its formation if they so chose.
Why did that not get any traction?
Just opposition to the idea from other legislators and certain folks. So
To the to
those
the to
discussions are
the
happening, and it was on general orders, and it was on the wall, so it was out there for everyone to see.
Oh, I think I remember that bill now. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But that's a great example of how, the legislature impacts that. Or, where you have a system where the property tax accrues to you, and every year you pay your bill, but if you don't pay your bill for a few years, the property is no longer yours. That's a mighty power that the government has, and for having such a power, there's so little talk about it. So
Yeah.
little talk.
One of the big hopes and bills that I've been pushing is, you're right, we need education. I mean, you made the point that our general taxpayer doesn't know. Now, you made that point, and I agree with you.
Is
Okay.
that by design, or is that just how it's kind of created itself over
I
the
have
years?
no idea. Do you think it's by design? I mean,
Yes.
I don't know, but that's why I passed the transparency bill last year, because I want to make this as clear as possible for folks in as readable a method as we can. And we're working through that now. The registry is now downloaded, so that when these discussions that you want to have, which I agree we should have, we're at least starting from the same data points. We're not going to argue about facts. We're going to start talking about policies. And some of this
Wait a minute.
transparency is based on some of the information that we can make available to the local taxpayer and ourselves in a very easy, a much more easily um, derived manner than we have now. Because you're right, people don't know.
Well, I mean, it's also I've seen this happen where uh, the information is made really almost indecipherable to people who are very smart. Not a year goes by that people don't come to our office and say, "Hey, I just went over to my school board and I asked for budget, and they gave me a copy, and I'm trying to read through it, and I'm a CPA, and I still can't figure this out."
Oh,
Happens every year. It
I would
seems
tell you the same
designed.
thing when I look at them. It's not easy to do. I agree with you. And I think that's what turns people off from being involved in some of this. And I'm I'm spending a lot of energy to try to make it simpler for the average person to see and
And
do.
and
And
and I
and I
and and I get and I applaud simple, but I also am frustrated that you can just do a head tax, and everybody pays $1,000 if you live in Idaho, and that's simple. But what's not simple is also the spending component. I mean, we got cities and counties that are wasting money like you wouldn't believe. I mean, you probably will believe it, but a lot of folks wouldn't believe it. And and that's where a lot of these levies are rated. Boise, of course, is a great example, but I'm sure you'll find plenty of examples in Coeur d'Alene where government just wastes money on things and then calls it good, and it's all just rounding errors anyway, right? I can spend a little more money on X, and no one will really know because it just gets swallowed up in a giant budget. Yeah, it's you got your hands full, sir. If you're going to be chairman of that committee, you the complexity and and I think it's an intentional complexity. From Well, I guess rather than me making a statement, since I'm interviewing you, I'll just ask you. It seems to me that some of that complexity is the result of um, government paid lobbyists. In other words, I guess I would let me ask: does the cities association, the Association of Idaho City, the Idaho Association of Counties, the various lobbyists for the sundry taxing districts have too much influence over what the tax policy looks like, especially property tax policy?
I don't know, in the committees that I'm in, that there's too much influence in at the House. Um, I have used the Association of Idaho Counties more so because that's the side I've dealt on, as a resource for information. But that hasn't swayed me or anything that I do about that. So personally, no, I don't think so. Um, I do know last year, Senator Rice's bill that came before 389, um, the, uh, the cities had concerns about that bill, and they lobbied very hard in the Senate, and that's what they do. And like all other interest groups, including your group and the Farm Bureau and the education people and the food producers. And I respect the ability to have opinion to do that. But as far as me personally knowing and thinking someone has overly influenced something that I've been a part of specifically, I haven't seen that.
Well, I mean,
But I
it's
think
not.
there is influence in various groups, and they make their positions known. I think that happens a lot.
Yeah, but they do. It does happen. It's always happened.
Yeah.
But the difference with them, though, is that you pay for it. So you pay your property taxes to the city, and then the city turns around and pays dues to the Association of Idaho Cities, and then those monies are used to lobby against a bill that might lower your property taxes. Isn't that unseemly?
So Wayne, that's why I'm working really hard, and we have a format that I'm working on right now that it would be on email form because I don't want to spend the money to send a piece of paper to everyone, that will in one spot show by taxing district how much money the state contributes to help offset taxes. It's very simple. It's very clean. Below that is a budget history of the various districts and how their budgets are growing and not growing. And those are things, you're right. You have cities and counties who have people that get elected that make policy for their cities and counties and their taxing districts. My aim is, again, simply to give information for folks to ask proper questions for those folks, as they should be able to do. And it's not for me to tell someone how to spend or not to spend at this point. But again, I believe that arming the taxpayer at the local level with just the factual data of what's going on is good for everyone. Okay. And I think the questions that need to get answered will be that need to be asked will get asked. And I think it will bring the local taxpayer more involved in the process, or that's my goal. And I think it'll increase the dialogue with those they elect to those positions. And at this point, that's what I'm working on really hard right now and started last year. There are other things we can do. I wouldn't doubt I don't disagree with you at all. So that's kind of where my gist is right now. That's where my focus is.
I wonder, in the terms of transparency, this is tongue in cheek slightly, just slightly. What if you put in that
Not you.
transparency a requirement that if your local government spends money to lobby the legislature to influence tax policy, that dollar amount goes on your transparency website too, or on your
I
tax
have no
notice?
problem doing that. There are
This
things
tax
that I'll be
policy
doing for
costs
accounts.
this tax policy cost the city of Coeur d'Alene $10,000.
I think it's Wayne, you're tongue in cheek. I don't think that's a bad idea at all. I think if an urban renewal district is paying someone to be a lobby, I think we should all know that.
They
I
are.
think that's totally above boards. And I think
Because
that's
and it's
a
not
question that
because
people should ask.
not because I mean I don't want disclosure for every lobbyist. I want the disclosure for the lobbyist that I paid for.
Well,
The because the Ada County Highway District I think spends $100,000 on lobbyists. I have to double check that figure. It might be dated, but what a mess.
this is
And it's just
taxpayer money, and we represent the taxpayer. We
you
represent a lot of
represent
people, but
you do.
yeah, the royal we,
Yeah.
it's taxpayer money. And I think that's all fair to know where that's coming from and where it goes. I think that just makes common sense.
Can we move away from tax policy because we've been at it for 44 minutes
It's
and there's got
your
to be more.
show, Wayne. Let's go.
Oh, thank you,
I'm
Jim.
just living in it, right?
So I'm really grateful for you to come on the program because, of course, I'll probably ask you something like, so on our Freedom Index, I don't remember where you landed, somewhere in the 70s, maybe,
I'm
right?
usually in the 70s. Yeah.
In
Low
the
70s, high
70s.
70s. Depends. Yeah.
So, I mean, why do you suppose? Give me your feel on what that is. You get asked about that when you're back in town. So, what do you tell your constituents about us and your rating? Do you consider yourself a moderate, or do you?
What I say is let's talk about a specific bill and talk about it and see what you think, and we'll talk about my vote. And a great majority of the time they said, yeah, okay, I understand. So,
I mean, you
I
want to
don't
hear
look at
the
it.
what's that? You talk
I
about
just invite
specific.
anybody, if they've got a question, it's real easy to look at a score or somebody else's score. I mean, that's fine. But what I ask is, ask me about my vote on a particular issue and see what went into my decision and the facts that I have that perhaps aren't known by everyone. So I'm glad to discuss that. And typically when that happens, I've got, I don't get a lot of complaints. So,
What's the one that you get complained about the most?
I don't get a lot of complaints in my district, in
Just
District
a,
4. I don't. I mean, to be quite honest, I get a lot of complaints from folks that are definitely on the other side of the aisle. And I'll still answer them, and they're my constituents in District 4, and I tell them why I did it respectfully. So, or why I voted that way.
did you ever get people? What was one of the bigger issues that we had last legislative session was the that grant for the pre-kindergarten program. You voted for that, and
I did.
I heard a lot about that. I mean, it was just wild there for a while. That was I don't know whether it was negative on the spending index or on the freedom index. I don't remember which. I think it was an appropriations bill, wasn't it? I think it was an appropriations
Uh,
bill.
was it, or was it?
Yeah, yeah, it was.
I don't
I'm
remember if
almost.
it was an authorizing or an appropriations. It was, yeah, okay.
It doesn't matter. But anyway, that was a big one.
Yep.
And I was really surprised to see your vote on that. I mean, I wasn't surprised to see Amador's vote on it, for example, but I was surprised by yours. Tell me why you voted for that.
And I remember this specifically. I got 16 emails of people asking me why and concerned. And so I answered all 16, and all 16 of those people said, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I did not know that. I appreciate your answer. And here's what it was. That was, as you recall, that was very early in the talk about critical race theory. And it was quite early. And what I was looking at, I have one of those centers in my District 4, and I was very involved in that center long before this happened. And I'd toured the facilities, I'd met the administrators, met the people, and more importantly, met the kids. And I had not seen any evidence of those teachings, which I totally disagree with, and voted for the bill that came up. I believe it was 377. And I in no way agree or put up with or condone or approve of critical race theory. But at that time, we were still having families that weren't working, that in the middle of COVID, their parents didn't have jobs and their kids needed somewhere to go, and they were all struggling. I belong on the board of the Boys and Girls Club of North Idaho, who is a facilitator of that group. And I guarantee you, and I know you, that I know the board of directors of the Boys and Girls Clubs of North Idaho do not condone critical race theory. I reached out to a gentleman from the main facilitator, the United Way of North Idaho, and I grilled him. I said, hey, listen, these kids are struggling. There's a subject for critical race. If you're teaching or using those books, and I gave him the whole library because Representative Giddings gave me all the information on it. I said, are you using these? Because if you use these, this is not going to work. And I've got it on letterhead, and I still have it in writing. We don't use these. We will not use these. And this is not what we do at our local center here in Coeur d'Alene. So for that reason, and that reason alone, is why I voted for it. Now, I also made an effort, which didn't bear fruit, to say, well, let's not. So I voted for it. There were some other conversations about, well, why don't we just do the appropriation process? If we're trying to help these kids, let's appropriate some money that didn't have all this going on, that early education, the controversy of critical race theory, and that didn't get off the ground. It wasn't brought up. So that was why I voted for that bill specifically for my district, for those kids at that time.
So
There were other bills that were killed to bring House Bill 377 to the forefront. And I voted for 370, and I believe it was 377 because I believe that was the right bill. We shouldn't be spending money on critical race theory. So.
well, but okay. So there are a couple of components there. I appreciate the thorough explanation. Just going back to the pre-kindergarten grant,
Okay.
wouldn't you be concerned though that we had documented that the Idaho Association for the Education of Young Children was actively promoting, along with its national partner, critical race theory and woke education? So the money was passing through them. You weren't concerned that maybe your preschool program in your part of the state wasn't doing that, or promised you they wouldn't do that, but that didn't preclude some other pre-kindergarten center somewhere else in Idaho from doing it as well, right?
Yeah, that is definitely a true statement. At the time this was happening with that first vote, there were concerns about that. But at that time, I was doing this more as a constituent vote for my center in District 4, trying to help my folks. I would agree with you. And I also think that there needs to be a discussion in that Idaho is not a full pre-K state. And I think there can be a conversation about that. But I think there's a lot more discussion that needs to be done about pre-K and how that, if we're going to be spending money on pre-K when Idaho is not a pre-K state. And I think that's a fair conversation to have. But at that time, my concern or my knowledge factor, again, I'm not on the education committee and I didn't have the in-depth of that. It became very evident after that vote, some of the concerns that you're bringing up. And I would agree with some of those concerns. At the same time, I wanted to do the right thing by our kids in District 4.
Okay, let me back up so I understand you correctly. So are you saying that if the vote had come later with the additional information you were hearing about the state and national sponsors of this pre-kindergarten program, that you might have voted no?
Well, if the vote would have come later, we would have passed House Bill 377, which would have prohibited monies going to that program, I believe.
House Bill 377 doesn't prohibit critical race theory, public monies being used on critical race theory. It just precludes monies from being spent to compel a person to adhere to critical race theory.
Okay.
I mean, so you still have the same problem. It would be, hey class, here's a book about how white people are oppressors and black people are always the oppressed, or some other minority group.
I don't agree with those types of teaching.
But if I don't cross that bridge of saying something like, and now I want you to write a report about why that's true, it's technically still legal under House Bill 377. I mean,
Okay.
do you feel that House Bill 377 did enough to stop critical race theory in Idaho?
I thought that it did when we voted for it. You've done some more research on that bill than I have, so I would be at a disadvantage of that in that.
It didn't ban
in those types of discussions here at the Capitol. So,
as a bottom line, it did not ban critical race theory. Other states have banned it. We have not. Actually, a lot of states banned it because they heard Idaho did ban it, but it was a misreporting in the news, in the press.
Okay.
But just to go back to this, I need to clarify. So if I understood what you were trying to say, though, it's that House Bill 377 might have stopped that, so it made it to where it was the voting in favor of the legislation would have been voting in favor of the grant
when
program.
we had the discussion on it, it was in talking to the bill sponsors. I took from that discussion and that testimony that this was an effective tool to stop critical race theory from being taught with state funds or with funds that go through the state. That's my interpretation of the bill, and that's how I interpreted that bill.
Okay, okay, and I'm just trying to unweave a little bit of this. So, okay, going back to the issue of the pre-kindergarten program and um, this. Let's say another bill came along and it was to do the same thing as what you had last legislative session. I hear they're not going to bring one, but I'm just kind of wondering where your mindset is. If you did see a bill to fund that program this legislative session, would you vote for it?
Are you saying the exact same bill?
The exact same bill, the exact
I don't
same
know that
grant
I would.
program.
I would want to relook at that bill again because I know it's a huge controversial piece of of legislation, and I've already explained that I'm not in favor of critical race theory or the teaching of critical race theory. So I can tell you that for a fact. I would want to look at the bill again. Okay, I would want to see that. And I appreciate you telling me what that bill does. But for me to give you a definitive, specific answer, I would want to look at that again, Wayne, because
Um,
you're telling me that the bill does, or what we passed does a little bit different of what my impression of that bill was.
yeah, your bill
So,
does the bill that Idaho passed does not ban critical race theory. It just bans the coercing a student to adhere to critical race
okay.
theory. Which is the reason why we're still seeing it, and how the universities in particular, but also the K-12 education system, quickly adapted to what the legislature had said in writing that it wanted. Which and really the real issue is that there's no class called critical race theory. It's not like, okay, kids, here's a lesson, here's today's lesson in
I
critical
get
race
it.
theory.
I
It's
get it.
embedded in the system. And have you heard about some of the stuff that's going on in the Coeur d'Alene School District?
I have not.
Yeah, there's
It
a
has not been brought to my attention. No, it hasn't.
okay. We'll make sure we get that research to you. Let me just say that we put together some research that indicates that it's endemic, what we now call critical social justice, and how it's woven into the State Department of Education, State Board of Education, promoted through the governor's office, promoted through Common Core, promoted through school boards and the vendors that school districts hire. It's very, very fascinating. New report just came out that we'll just hot off the press. But I think Dustin and the team are going to get that over to you so you can see what else. And I'd love to hear
Perfect.
your
Perfect.
impressions on it. But let me go back to just the idea of on the discussion that's germinating. We'll leave critical race theory aside for just a little bit, but not go too far, because there is a big discussion coming up about in past years it's been about pre-kindergarten. I guess pre-kindergarten is not the focus this year, but full day kindergarten is. Where are you? A proponent of full day kindergarten, state funded full day kindergarten, or even pre-kindergarten? It sounds, I don't know, put words in your mouth, but it sounds as if you might be.
Well, again, from 50,000 feet, I would want to look at the program. My concern is that before adding anything that we do new, I think we've got to see what we have now and try to make it better than what we have now, whether it's Ron Mendive's bill from last year that didn't go anywhere to it. If the concern out there is that not enough money is being spent on education, and I don't know that the answer to that, I don't know why we're adding something more when we have scarce resources. And so I'm concerned about adding that full day pre-K when we have other issues in our education system to look at. So again, I'm not on the education committee. I'm looking this more at a budget type of situation on trying to do things when it appears that there are many that say we're not doing enough in what we're required to be funding now. So,
Are you saying
so
that we're I'm sorry, I really don't want to put words in your mouth. I need to make sure I understand you. So you're saying that there's a possibility that we're not spending enough on the existing K through
I,
12
s-
education?
I said some are saying we're not spending enough on
Oh,
the
you're not one
education
of them.
system. No, I'm not one of them. But
Okay.
given that conversation out there, I don't know how we can be talking about bringing something else on at this time right now. So,
But
um,
you didn't feel that way with regard to the pre-kindergarten grant. You viewed that through a different lens.
I viewed that through a different lens in the fact that at the time that it occurred, we still had families that didn't have jobs, that were not working, that it was more of an effort to try to help kids and parents in my community there on 15th Street, as opposed to the argument on critical race theory in that group. Since I knew that my school wasn't doing that, I was concerned about making sure that we could take care of the kids if possible. That was the
But
driving
you
force on that vote.
but you sided with expanding the system at that point, is what I'm getting at.
At that point, in the midst of COVID, when families were suffering, I thought on a one-time basis, for me, that would help my community, my kids in the community, and some of the parents in the community that were dealing with the ravages of COVID, from not having jobs to doing all those things. That was the
But just in
lens well, let me finish. That was the lens of why I voted yes for that facility in District 4. That was the driver of that decision.
so just so I'm clear, that's not the thought process wasn't and isn't that you support an ongoing expansion of that education system. It's
At
just
this
this, you
time,
said one
no,
time
but I would.
COVID.
Yeah, that's why that vote happened. You were asking about that vote, and that's why I did
Okay.
that vote. Before I would want
Okay.
to expand any other program, I would want to look at it and see if it's appropriate. And I'm not saying that it is. I'm not saying that it isn't. Okay. You asked a specific question about a specific vote on a specific program at a specific time when we had people that were suffering. And that's why I did what I did. And I thought it was a good vote. And quite frankly, the people that were concerned, they agreed.
Oh,
Um,
well,
so,
sure. But
so
can I get philosophical with you for a little bit? And that's really why I
sure.
like doing these shows, because it's a chance. I've been in this policy space for 30 years almost. And I started when I was 5. And that's a joke. You're supposed to laugh. No? Okay. Thanks, Jim. That hurts me. Anyway,
Ha, ha, ha.
okay, listen. But we've never really have a chance ever to have a real discussion beyond, the day-to-day bills and sound bites and one quote in a story from a hour-long interview. This is a chance to really dig deep into your thought process and the thought process of other elected officials. On pre-kindergarten, let's put CRT and all that other stuff aside. Let's pretend that that's not a thing for right now. Um, we'd always said that we were opposed to pre-kindergarten and opposed to expanding the full-day kindergarten, um, for moral reasons, for objectionable moral reasons. The
And what are
the
those
first
moral
of
reasons?
the first of those is, if you need to educate your kid, that's sort of your responsibility. You have a child, you're supposed to clothe them, bathe them, dress them, teach them. It is your responsibility. And initially, the age for compulsory education was, what it was, 5 or 6 or something like that. And now you're constantly
I don't know.
lowering the age and expanding the system. And then in doing so, what you're doing is you're taking away from the parental responsibility of raising and educating your kid and giving it to the state. And that's the objection even before CRT was a thing. And we still feel that way with regard to full day kindergarten, even half day kindergarten. Something diminishes when you grow government, right? And that thing that is getting the thing that diminishes is um, is the parent, is the parent child relate, is the family. Agree, disagree, or maybe you've never thought of it. Maybe you need some time to think about it.
I've never really thought about it in those terms, quite frankly. I do believe the parent has to be at the center of that argument for their child, and I think that it's quite frankly a parental choice issue, and I think those are good points, but it's not something it's not been something that I've occasioned to think about, quite frankly.
Really? I mean,
Well, I
and
mean,
then
my kids went through the education system. They're doing fine. I've been focusing on other issues that we have that I end up working on. Um, like I said, the education system is an area of our government that I don't spend a lot of time as we all become specialists at what we do at the Capitol. So I'm not there for that. I do know that we have to involve our parents, and it's important to keep our parents involved in what their children do. And I think choice for those parents, and as you said, they have certain responsibilities, and they have choices they need to make for their kids. So I think in most all those cases, I'd probably defer to the parent, quite frankly, as opposed for me to tell them what to do with their child.
and yeah, I don't think anyone's telling you to take over that decision. It's a question though of, I mean, are you saying that you're presenting them a choice? They don't have to go to pre-kindergarten. They don't have to go to the government kindergarten system if they don't want to. Is that
That would be something I would probably stand for. Again, I haven't spent a lot of time in that thought, but I think the parents should have the choice of what they want their child at that
sure?
age to do, quite frankly.
But the other part, and this goes back to the tax policy part, and this is where is more your speed, more your forte. We go back to tax policy, which
Specialty.
is when your specialty. When you create a new program, it necessarily needs to be funded by taxes. And the tax is basically the legislature voting to take money out of my pocket and give it to somebody else. Isn't that from each according to their abilities to each according to their needs?
I think the statement you made is true. I mean, when we choose to tax, we're taking money from people and spending it somewhere. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. You know, that's what it is.
Should, and shouldn't we be more resistant to the idea of taking money from people? I mean, if you maybe you're a
Oh,
parent, maybe you're
absolutely. I told you from the beginning, I'm an equal opportunity tax cut guy. I want as lowest taxes as possible. I want to do things that keep money in people's pockets. I mean, that's what we started the conversation on. So, yeah,
so this year
I'm a total proponent of that. Absolutely.
this year the governor's budget calls for 17% spending increase, and part of that includes things like let's basically fund full day kindergarten. We don't quite say it that way in the governor's budget proposal, but essentially it's money to fund full day kindergartens. That's what the districts are intending to do with the funding provided by the state government. Is that okay?
I, I don't know if it
You'll get
says that or not, if that's what they're saying. I don't know that it's okay um, without having the parent involved in that conversation.
no. I'm not talking about. No, I'm not talking
I
about the parents.
don't
I'm
think.
talking about the legislature may vote. You Representative Addis may vote on a bill this legislative session that funds essentially full day kindergarten. Yes, good or bad?
I don't know that that's something I would vote for at this time. No, I would have to see it, but it's not something that I'm looking at voting for right now, given what are said to be other needs in our education system. But I
What
would
would
want
you
to
ra-
look at that.
what would you rather? But you'd entertain it, I guess. Whereas and that's the difference, I guess, is you'd entertain the idea
I
of
would
funding.
listen. I would listen and see what you had in mind.
Yeah, I
Doesn't mean
wouldn't.
I'm going to vote for it. Well,
No, isn't that
that's probably
interesting?
a
I mean, I'm not,
difference.
I'm not put, I'm not putting you down, by the way. I'm just saying it's a different mindset, and I understand you're an elected official and I'm not. But I wouldn't even entertain the idea of full day kindergarten because in order to fund it, it necessarily means that I'd have to take money from one person who earned it and give it to somebody who didn't, and kills me inside. And you don't have that same, you don't feel that, you don't, that inner fire that I'm feeling about that at the moment, which is fine. I'm
No,
just pointing that out.
I wouldn't say that I don't feel the inner fire. It's just that in my position, I like to hear everyone out and I like to listen to it and I like to see what's there. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to vote one way or the other, but I think it's important to listen. And I think it's important to look at all of those factors and then you make a decision. Then you live with your decision.
But do you have a gut feeling about whether or not the government education system should be expanded? Um, right at this moment or ever, or
I'll tell you that I think a lot of money is spent right now on education. And part of the transparency program that I'm trying to get across to see where that money goes and what it's doing and where it's been and make accurate decisions on where we're at right now and what we've got and where we're at. And I think it's important to have all of that data out there before deciding to spend a lot more, to spend a lot less. And at this point, I don't have those answers, Wayne. I just don't have the answers. That's one of the reasons that we're tracking all of the budgets of the various education, the school districts and such, to see where we're at and what we're doing, what percentage of the money going here, where it's going there, and maybe finding some efficiencies with that money. So maybe we can be as efficient as possible with our spending on education. And that's kind of where I am, whether it's education or city budgets or county budgets or highway district budgets or things like that. So I'm kind of in a process right now, and I'm wanting to see some factual items before making big decisions. And I think it's important to make those decisions based on having that knowledge.
The other day, the legislature voted to, and I think you voted in favor of the bill too, to put teachers and other school district employees onto the state government insurance plan. In the course of that conversation, which I didn't know this, and then my research team is still looking into this. So you learn something new every day. Sally Toon said that it's good. She was, of course, liberal Democrat, so she's excited by any prospect of throwing money into the system. She said that this is wonderful because the state of Idaho used to do this, that the state had employees, school district employees on the state insurance program, and that ended in 1972. Why did it end?
I have no idea. I wasn't aware of that fact. Obviously, even if I started at 5, I probably would have been there in 1972 either. But I don't know why they did or they didn't do that.
No,
I caught that too. I thought that was pretty interesting.
I was born in 72, but I don't remember the debate that led to that decision. But I just thought it was kind of interesting that every legislator I've asked, if we did this before and then we stopped doing it, you would think people would want to know why that thing was, because this program is going to cost $1 billion over the course of 10 years.
Yeah,
but you voted.
I would want to know why that is.
So why did you vote for it?
Why did I vote for it?
Yeah.
For a couple reasons. First of all, I think that we have teachers that we pay a lot less than all of our surrounding states, and that's just a fact of life. If the state of Washington or somebody else wants to pay more money, it's up to those folks to go and take those jobs if that's what they want to do. We are limited in resource right here in Idaho, and we can pay what we can pay, and that's where we're at. As far as healthcare was concerned, I felt that this would do a couple things. It would help us retain and maintain teachers. And I wasn't aware, it wasn't brought up that it was going to be $1 billion bill over X amount of time. So that's a ton of dough. I agree with you. But for that cost to perhaps retain teachers and not go through the continual replacement of teachers and what it costs to replace teachers, but in the long run, it would make fiscal sense for Idaho, given the factors that we saw in that debate. I'm also hoping that that the effects of healthcare and better healthcare plans and getting more people on healthcare hopefully reduces healthcare costs for the future and makes it more efficient for Idaho in the future and those folks. So, looking at teacher turnover and not having teachers and thinking this was probably a pretty good way to keep some teachers and continue to try to teach our kids is basically why I voted for that.
It's an interesting issue. And one of the things that I have tried to wrap my head around, and I've had conversations with other legislators about this, and it's not, I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer for this, Jim, so that you're not being scored. But ostensibly, what we have now is a system, you benefit from the system, and other state government employees benefit from that system, where you pay a smaller premium than the rest of Idaho public at large, where the deductibles are lower than the rest of the public at large, and the public at large is still the one paying the bill. And it's kind of a weird thing. So in other words, your insurance plan is better than the people who pay the bill. Where does that factor into the discussion in terms of cost savings? If we're really serious about cost savings, I mean, there are some school districts where 100% of the insurance premium is borne by the taxpayer, not by the employee. And where deductibles are, remarkably low, like $250, $500, where my deductible is, $5,000 because I can't afford that plan. Where does that? And I understand you have this responsibility. You're both the voice for the taxpayer, but you also, have to see to it that you can still employ a public workforce.
Yeah, I think part of it is trying to be competitive in certain areas. I know that in private industry, our plan was very similar to this plan. I mean, we had a good medical program. Again, we paid for it ourselves. I don't have an analysis on what those cost differences are and what it costs the state. I know it's a self-funded program. I haven't really done a deep dive into the insurance premiums and how that all works out. So I don't know that I could give you a factual answer on how that works out, other than I ran for election. I got here, and that was the premium that was available to us when we signed up.
But I mean, if the desire is to save money, it seems as if one of the ways you would save money is that you put the insurance plan in line with what the rest of the public endures. It's certainly not as good, but it's what we endure, and it's less expensive especially over a group of thousands of people.
Yeah, there are pluses and minuses. I know it is a very good insurance plan. We all sign up for this job voluntarily to do this job. It's a desire to try to help. Most people that I know that are doing this do this at a tremendous cost compared to what they could be doing in their regular day jobs or doing a day job, and it's a willingness to serve. As you know, this isn't a very high-paying job, and I don't know a lot of people that get into it for the pay. It's something to do. Are there trade-offs?
No,
Is it a better health plan? Perhaps it probably is. Again, I defer to your just on what you're paying for your plan. On the other side of it is a lot of long hours and a lot of work that you do, which again, you sign up for when you run for election. And I think you make $18,000 a year doing this job. And again, I'm not doing this for $18,000 a year. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. But I think there's a trade-off and there's a balance. And it's when you look at the total compensation for what we work, I don't know how out of line it is compared to other private sector or other public sector jobs. I mean, I know I'm not certainly making a whole lot of money here. And
Yeah,
while my health program may be maybe better, I mean, when you look at it in totality, I don't, I don't, I think it does even out, Wayne.
I mean, there are a lot of components, and again, I'm not just talking about state legislators. I'm just saying you're part of that same pool, and a lot of the people were saying in the course of the debate, we're just putting teachers on the same plan or giving them access to the same plan that we state legislators have, which is true. I'm just wondering at what point. So remember that plan that you have is really, really good.
Yeah.
But we pay for it. The taxpayers pay for it. I know you're a taxpayer too, but we collectively pay for you to have a better plan than most people because you're part of this really, really big pool of state employees. And the other part of that too that I wonder about is, remember, that's on top of the really, really generous retirement plan that the state of Idaho has. Now,
The Percy plan.
it's the Percy plan. The Percy plan allows for some employees to retire as early as when they're 50. You talked about teacher pay, and I would ask you, well, teacher pay, the take home pay would be a lot higher if 20% of their paycheck wasn't going to the very expensive retirement plan. But no, how come no one's talking about, at least giving teachers or other state employees the option of being on a defined contribution plan if we're so concerned about raising teacher take-home pay?
I don't know why anybody's not talking about that. I mean, it's probably a conversation that could be had. I think when you look at the total compensation packages, a lot of these things, and I haven't made a study of it, but you have a competitive factor in trying to hire people, and you look at salaries and wages, and you look at healthcare costs. And I don't know personally, I don't know where our state employees by and large stack up. I know what certain county officials make for certain jobs that seem to be below the market rate for other types of wages. So I think there's a package that's involved with which consists of pay, and it consists of retirement, and it consists of healthcare, and it's a matter of attracting people to come and want to work for you. And so I don't know where the nubbins begin and end. I just don't have that information for you. And again, I don't have a problem with a conversation on that at all. I mean, I kind of told you that's who I am. If we want to talk about it, let's talk about it. But,
I
so
understand that, but
it'd be hard for me to give you an answer to that because there's a bunch of different angles that you have to not angles. There's a bunch of different areas that you have to add up together to get to an end result, if you will.
Fair enough. The issues are very, very complicated, and they are intertwined. There's no question about that. It just kind of seems as if there's not a holistic conversation about any of this stuff before we commit to a major policy choice, apparently one that we were engaged in 50 years ago that we stopped. And so we restart this, and then after the bill's out and passed, and then we start going, oh, wait a minute. Are there other things we could be doing to raise teacher take-home pay or other school employee take-home pay? Is there other ways to make these jobs attractive?
I think those are great conversations to have. I seriously
we never
wouldn't
have them.
discussing those. Wow.
But we never have them, which is unfortunate. But let me ask you. Let's change gears. Last legislative session, the budget committee sent you all a bill to continue funding our colleges and universities in the same amount, essentially, they had been doing, and the House rejected that bill overwhelmingly. You were part of that vote. You also voted against the bill to fund our colleges and universities, demanded that JFAC take another swipe at it. In taking the other swipe at it, JFAC cut $2.5 million specifically from school social justice programs. And that's the bill that the House, Senate passed and the governor signed. Since then, nothing has changed. The president of Boise State University was in JFAC a couple of days ago, and she said basically that they've done nothing. She was asked many times, 3 times, what programs she cut. She had to cut $1.5 million at Boise State in social justice. They've done nothing. I understand Idaho State University was at the Capitol today, and they said, well, we've moved some of these general fund social justice things over to fees, which is an interesting decision, I guess. University of Idaho comes in tomorrow. Scott Green is already on record as having told the media that they're not cutting anything either. They just spread the cut. It's actually a decrease in the increase around to different agencies within the college so as to avoid hurting any of the programs. So now you're one of 70 on the House floor, and the budget for colleges and universities come to you, and there are no cuts to colleges and their social justice spending. What do you do?
Well, you're saying that JFAC is not going to make cuts. If they're not going to make cuts, there's not anything I can do because
If, if they followed,
restate that, would you?
if JFAC follows the governor's budget, and it appears they will, and they send you a bill that does not make reductions to colleges and universities' social justice programs and holds them accountable for the cuts that you've already demanded but they didn't get, what would you do?
I'd be concerned. I think I would be really concerned. I would want to.
Would you vote for a budget that does not cut social justice spending bigly from colleges and universities this legislative session?
Are you talking a critical race theory?
I'm talking the colleges and universities.
I'm having a trouble because I don't know the.
Well, okay. What is social justice?
When you say social justice, I'm not. You're asking me for a specific answer, and I don't know that I am.
Well, that's what the universities were told to cut, and they knew what we were talking about. We were talking about things like the Gender Equity Center and the Anti-Racism Center and the LGBTQ office at the University of Idaho, and these various programs on these campuses, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, the Inclusive Excellence Student Council at Boise State, all these different leftist programs that are woke. That's one word for it. Social justice, agenda oriented is another word for it. The legislature said, cut that spending, $2.5 million. Now we think there's way more than that, possibly as much as $20 million, but $2.5 million was a good start. You directed the universities to make those cuts. That bill was signed into law and the universities ignored you. What should the legislature do about that?
I think they should look into doing it again. I would want to look into that and see what's going on with that. I think
so
if that's what we said we did and they didn't do it, we would have to look into that.
If JFAC sends you a bill that does not hold them accountable, would you vote for that bill?
I don't know. I would want to look at the bill, Wayne. I would want to look at the bill.
I mean,
it's hard to be hypothetical, but I was pretty clear on my vote before, and I would want to see that, and I would want to look at that bill.
I mean, it seems like if somebody punched you in the nose and then walked away, I mean, that's what they've done. What's to discuss? What's to look at?
Based on what you've told me, I wouldn't disagree. I would want to look at it myself, Wayne. I really would.
Are you concerned about the possibility did you think our colleges and universities are teaching our kids to be leftists?
I don't know. I would hope not. I don't have any first knowledge that they are or they aren't. But then again, I haven't done all the research that you folks have. So
yeah, we've done.
I would hope that they weren't doing it, and I wouldn't want them to do that. Let's put it that way. But do I have certain knowledge? I got to tell you, I don't.
Yeah, we've done 2 reports on it. This stuff is endemic, and it seems to me, I don't know, maybe you have a different perspective because you're there every day. I'm not, and I now relish the thought that I only have to go to the Capitol every now and then, but you have to be there every day.
You're asking me, do I have knowledge in this? That, and I don't. Do I approve of it? Heck no, I don't approve of it. And I don't want it, and I had a vote on it because of that. So But then you ask me, I don't know if it's happening or it's not. And I would want to know that before answering a question. And I think that's pretty reasonable.
Well, I mean, if you thought last year that it was happening and you voted for the bill that cut $2.5 million and nothing has changed, doesn't that mean it's still happening? Or is the argument now that it has?
I don't know. I mean, I would want to know if it's happening or not. I don't know if it is, but I don't know if it's not either.
I can absolutely tell you that it is.
And I appreciate that. And you've done much more research than I have, but I would like to see it and I'd like to look at it.
Well, okay. Well,
I
we'll
know
make sure.
I had friends at the Capitol when 377 came around, and a bunch of people were saying, "Hey, we're not teaching critical race theory in our schools." I don't know if they were or if they weren't, but I had dear friends, there were legislators that said, "But I have friends in Washington whose parents have taken their kids out of school because they are teaching critical race theory. I don't want it to happen here." I mean, those are the conversations that were had. So again, I don't know if it's being taught or if it's not being taught. I hope it's not being taught.
You don't think it's being taught in Idaho?
I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if it's being taught or not, Wayne. I really don't. I hope that it's not being taught. I would prefer that it's not being taught.
I just wonder how much more evidence I need to give to state lawmakers, because we've been writing report after report after report after report on it. And Coeur d'Alene features very, very prominently in the report that our Center for American Education just put out. And you know that Sherry Ibarra was just in Coeur d'Alene not long ago telling the Kootenai County Republican Central Committee that she understands that there are issues over at the Coeur d'Alene School District. Now, when the video of her saying that got out, she ended up walking that statement back, but she herself told your Central Committee that there are some things taking place that are very, very concerning. So if you see evidence that that critical race theory, I'll go back to critical. I thought we were done with critical race theory. I guess not. You're never done with critical race theory. If you see evidence that Idaho school kids are being indoctrinated, would you vote against a budget based on that?
If that were happening, yeah.
Okay, I'll hold you to it. You know, it's interesting because I mean, we also run a government television station that's engaged in indoctrination. I ask people, and I'll ask you, how much money do you give to Boise Public Radio, which runs National Public Radio's mouthpiece on campus?
To answer that question, I don't contribute personally.
Sure you do. You pay taxes.
Well, okay. I thought you were asking me if I personally contribute to them, and no, I don't.
Well, I mean, you contribute under the force of if you don't contribute, you're going to go to jail because you didn't pay your taxes. But is it okay for?
Fair enough.
Is that okay? I mean, that's going to be in the budget too. When you vote for the college and university budget, included in that number is the money for Boise State Radio, which runs the National Public Radio affiliate, and so does Idaho State University too, by the way. It's not a huge amount of money, but it's still state-funded leftist propaganda, and you go back to your constituents and you have to tell them you voted for that in Kootenai County.
So I've made it clear, and to some of the people that I've had discussions on it with this time, I don't think that tax dollars should be spent on on partisan news sources, whether it's left or right. I just don't know that that's an appropriate spending of taxpayer dollars, and I would agree with that. I think if you're concerned about leftist indoctrination with taxpayer dollars, I think you have to also be concerned about the other side. And I think where tax dollars are concerned, I think it's important to not use to spend our taxpayer dollars on partisan programming, quite frankly.
Yeah, well, I'm not even.
I agree. I completely agree.
I appreciate that. I'm angry with the fact that it's being spent on partisanship, particularly leftist partisanship. But I would argue, even if they didn't do that, somebody needs to explain to me why the government should be in the news business. Didn't the Soviets do that? Doesn't China still do that? Isn't that how North Koreans get their news? Why do I have to be involved in hiring Melissa Davlin? I like Melissa. She's a nice enough lady, but I wouldn't pay for her any more than I'd pay for Betsy Russell. But I pay for one.
Fair enough. Again, I
But
don't.
why does that happen at a legislature that's 85% controlled by Republicans?
I don't have an answer for that. I've never. That's the first time that question about that has been answered. I don't know what you want me to tell you.
I guess you have a lot of things to think about, huh? After we get done with this.
Well, but you're asking questions that I understand you're doing it. I mean, you're asking questions that I don't have I'm trying to look for a factual, reasonable answer of why this specifically is happening that way. I don't know why it's happening that way.
Yeah, I'm not.
It could be that it's always been done that way, which no one wants to hear, and I don't think is a right answer. But I'm trying to give you an answer, and I don't know what that answer is, quite frankly.
And Jim, I hope you understand. This is not designed to be a gotcha interview. Well, all I'm trying to do is talk about the things that you don't get these questions asked by the news media. I mean, the news media are interested in: do you support local option sales tax, or how do you feel about pre-day full day kindergarten, and stuff like that. They don't ask you about the state pension system or the mechanics of the tax system, or why our tax rate right now is so much higher than it was in the 1930s. They don't. I'm asking you the questions that you would expect a Republican-controlled legislature to find this to be a natural thing to ask about. There was a lot of hemming and hawing on the floor of the Capitol last year about the lieutenant governor's budget. And what was it, a $20,000 increase or something like that? But what's the biggest program in all of state government right now? What's the biggest program administered by state government today?
It's got to be either education budget or Medicaid, Medicare budget.
Medicaid.
Medicaid, yeah.
And how much time was spent talking about that? There was more time talking about the measly few $1,000s of the lieutenant governor's budget than the billions of dollars being spent on Medicaid. And half the babies born in Idaho are on Medicaid. You would think that a Republican-controlled legislature, why aren't those conversations happening? Are your colleagues talking about them, but they don't come up for discussion or something? Or
again, you're asking questions that I don't have the answer to. I don't have the answer why people aren't talking about that.
How about this?
You certainly are. I don't know why my other people aren't asking that question. I mean, that's never been posed to me. I mean, to be honest with you.
How about this? We'll let you digest all this stuff, and then we'll have you come back on and we'll talk more about these things, because I just don't get, Jim, I look at Idaho, and maybe you see this differently, and please tell me if you do, but I look at our state legislature, and I every day people talk to me about, God, wouldn't it be great if in Washington, D.C., the White House were once again controlled by a Republican, and the House was controlled by Republicans, and the Senate was controlled by Republicans. And my answer to that is, one, we did that already. Remember, we had George W. Bush for 2 terms, and part of that was spent with a Republican-controlled Congress. What did they do with it?
Not a whole lot.
And if you want to live that life, if you want to see what that looks like in spades every day, look at the Idaho legislature, controlled by Republicans since 1995. And we still have a government-run television system and radio program and confiscatory taxes and an expensive pension system, critical race theory, social justice programming in Idaho. Am I just mismatched with what I'm saying, mismatched with what you're talking about at the Capitol?
I don't think so. Again, you're asking me to speak for the legislature and all these folks that have been doing this for a lot of years. And those questions, again, I don't have the answer to it. And it's not something that me personally, I have been doing or specializing in. I've been busy doing certain things that we spend a lot of time talking about. And, I've been working awful hard at it. But those questions you have, you could ask to a bunch of different legislators, and I'd like to hear their answers. I talk with my legislators up in northern Idaho quite a bit, and what's going on, and those subjects don't come up. It's not just me that I don't know, but I'll talk to everybody from my district and the people that are near my district, and the folks around me on the floor and in committee. And whether you want to hear the answer or not, that specific question hasn't come up. And so I don't know why that is, but that's just what I'm telling you.
Yeah, I guess I just don't know if those conversations aren't happening. And I get that legislators have specialties, and I understand that there are particular topics that you work on perhaps more than others. But people are looking to Idaho to lead out on these kinds of discussions. And if down to the individual 105 legislators we're not talking about it, it's worrisome for the future of the country. If Idaho can't produce free market, limited government public policies, you're sure as hell aren't going to get that out of Congress.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think Washington D.C. is a completely different situation than we have here in Idaho.
How
I think
different?
there has been some progress in reducing regulation in Idaho. There has been economic growth. There has been things that have made us a fast growing state, and there's more things we can work on. And I think we have a more independent streak than DC does. There's a lot of good things in Idaho, and you have concerns about issues you have concerns on, and I respect that. But some of the questions you ask me, you think about, and you have your job to do, and I appreciate that. And that's your chosen forte, and you've been doing it for a long time, right? And those are your positions. The fact that whether I'm talking to the people that are on my committees on rev and tax, or people on the floor, and legislators from all spectrums, from right to left, and some of those questions don't get asked. I don't know what I can tell you other than that question doesn't come up, and that's just what I'm telling you. So
that is fascinating, but okay, fine. The question.
And I talk to a lot of people in the Capitol every day.
I get that. But let me ask this question, because again, not trying to play gotcha, but having now been told that the state of Idaho funds, government television through its tax dollars, and government radio, national public radio specifically, and you vote for that when you vote for an appropriation bill, does that concern you?
The appropriation bill that I am aware that I vote for is the one that has the emergency broadcast system in it. And I think that adds in the public television. And I've made it quite clear that, again, I don't think we should be spending taxpayer money on any partisan TV at all. But I think we should be supporting the emergency broadcast network. I wish those two things would be split off so we could look at it differently. But that has been the history of my vote on that appropriation.
Did you vote for the public TV budget last year? I don't remember.
I voted for the public broadcasting, the emergency broadcast system. And if public TV was in there, I would have voted for it, but it wasn't for that. It was for the emergency broadcast system. Continually asking to have those budgets split off so you could vote for one and not the other.
But if you'd have voted no, and I think it was one vote margin. If you'd have voted no, it doesn't mean we would shut down the emergency broadcast system. It means it would just go back to JFAC, and maybe they would do just exactly what you described.
That's a possibility. Right? You're absolutely right. That is a possibility.
Isn't it possible that it's convenient to the government television station that they're lumped in with the emergency broadcast system so that you're afraid to vote against it?
that could be a possibility too.
Okay. Well, we've been
I mean,
going on
I
for a
can't say
long.
that it is. I mean, you're asking me to say something like that, and I just can't say that. I
Say
don't
what?
know.
No, I don't know.
That's the reason it is done that way. I mean, you're
I
at,
don't know is a perfectly reasonable question, but or a perfectly reasonable answer. But what it ultimately means is that for all the conservative Republicans who run around telling me that public television is awful and national public radio is terrible. That's in the college and university budget. They still vote for it every year, and I get excuses about why it's happening. Oh well, it was included in the same bill. Okay, well, vote against the bill. It's kind of the explanation that I get from Mike Simpson about why he voted to take guns away from veterans and members of the military. Well, because it was going to go to the Senate, and the Senate was going to take care of that provision for me. Well, maybe somebody needs to, be the braver person and vote no and see what happens. But I don't want to lecture. I'm just making an observation. Any closing thoughts from you, sir?
No, I just appreciate the opportunity to come on. I just want to make sure you're aware that, again, we all become specialists, and my focus has been on perhaps some of the subjects that you're much more of an expert on than I am. Okay. So I'm trying to work on tax policy. I'm trying to work on transportation policy and trying to do those things. And that's where my focus has been in this last 3 years. So, and that's where my focus is probably going to be as we move forward. So,
we didn't talk about transportation at all. Did you want to hit a transportation topic before we close out?
I just think it's it's one of the most important things that if we have one-time money right now, I think that's the part of Idaho's that's going to be tough for my kids to pay for. I think as much as we can fix that right now so we can reduce our tax burdens in the future to make sure that our roads and bridges are safe, I think that's a wise investment in what we do. So I'm hoping that we can make headway and do even more to make sure that we take care of our roads. That's a pretty big concern of mine.
If we didn't have that one-time money, do you think you would be voting to raise taxes on transportation right now?
I probably wouldn't be voting to raise taxes. No.
Okay. I just wondered because it seemed as if that's the narrative that's going around. It's like, well, if we don't spend that money on this infrastructure stuff,
Yeah, I wouldn't raise taxes. I may redistribute some of the taxes we already collect. I think making different choices on what we have, but I'm not a big fan of
Did
raising
you have
taxes.
something particular in mind?
No, not at this point, given the fact that does seem to be one-time money that we can spend on it. I think the move last year going from 1.5% to 4%, 4.5% is going to help us get ahead of it. I mean, one of the problems we have is if we let some of the road bases go and some of those, it's going to cost us a whole lot more to rebuild them just than to maintain them. And so again, I think it's a wise investment.
You said that you would make other choices with regard to spending, and of course, obviously, you need to determine what that looks like and everything. But by having that one-time money, doesn't that put off the necessity to actually address the long-term obligations of transportation? I'm not talking about raising taxes because you already said you're against that, and I am too. But Medicaid, for example, is spiraling out of control. If you have a reason why you can't fix bridges and widen highways and repair potholes, it's because Medicaid is the biggest program in all of state government. And now you don't have to do anything about that this year because you have all this one-time money. Isn't that a terrible secondary effect?
That could be a valid statement. By the same token, I think we're going to have to get Medicaid under control. I would agree with that statement, but I think having the one-time money now that we can spend that money on those investments that will help us for the future. I think those are arguments that kind of stand on their own. I think I don't know that by making the decision to spend that money on roads means we're not talking about the Medicaid problem. I don't know that that's
Well, I
right.
don't know, Jim. And again, I understand you've only been in the legislature for 3 years, but I remember, believe it or not, I was invited to speak at an IACI conference in 2000. And at that conference, I mentioned that we ought to get Medicaid spending under control. And it's only 22 years later, and maybe one of these days we'll get around to doing that. Yeah, so I guess I have a lot less a lot less confidence that that's that's what would be happening anyway. But it's concerning
Probably
that now
confidence,
definitely won't happen.
a lack of confidence born of experience.
Listen, Jim, thank you so much for being on this program. It's been an awful lot of fun to have you on. Um, think about some of these things that we talked about, and maybe next time we'll get more in depth about what you've learned over the interim about some of these other topics that maybe you're not used to hearing about from in an interview program. So, but I do
Well,
truly
absolutely.
appreciate you.
And
Truly,
it's quite
truly, it's been
frankly
fun.
topics that I don't really hear about when I'm at the Capitol because that's not where I spend my time. So,
Well,
yeah,
so so
I
so
enjoy the
here
questions.
here's a chance, man. Maybe it's kind of like when you're, and this has been a while, of course, you find out that your wife's having a baby, and next thing you know, you see all these pregnant women running around because you never noticed it before. So maybe that I've asked you these questions, you're going to go, oh my gosh, there's a lot of folks talking about this stuff, and I never heard it before. Wayne mentioned it; he put it in my brain, and we'll be sure to get you that research
Maybe.
talk. Maybe we'll be sure to get you that research as well. In the meantime, thanks again for being on the show. I also want to thank all of our watchers or listeners. If you have other guests you'd like to see us bring in, please drop me an email, wayne@idahofreedom.org, and we will talk to you again soon. Bye bye, everybody.